You guys really like me talking about obscure World War II aircraft, but I guess it makes sense. I mean, let's be fair. There are dozens upon dozens upon dozens upon dozens of videos about some of the more famous aircraft, like the Mustang or the Spitfire, or the Bf-109, planes like that, but not a lot about all the other planes that were in the war. A whole bunch of them. There were so many different kinds of aircraft used in World War II that I could keep doing these lists for quite a while, as many of you have pointed out. So, I figured, let's continue it. Here's yet another 5 World War II planes that are criminally overlooked. And just in case you're a new reviewer, the main rule here is that they actually have to have served during World War II. Not necessarily fight or get into combat, but they have to have actually flown during the war and been deployed at some point. That's the general rule, giving me a little bit more wiggle room than some would like. But 5 planes, World War II, let's go. The Douglas Dolphin. Now, this is... I don't want to say it's cheating, because they did serve in World War II, but they barely served. For one thing, only 58 Dolphins were ever actually built, but that was partially because their original intention wasn't as a military aircraft at all. Douglas first designed the craft back in 1930, and back then it was known as the Sinbad, as a pure flying boat without wheels. It was actually intended as a luxurious flying yacht. Yes, really. But there wasn't a lot of demand for this particular plane, considering the whole, Great Depression thing. There just weren't that many people in the market for any kind of yacht, let alone a flying one. But they still persisted, and actually improved the airplane into what they called the Dolphin. This model had actual landing gear, so it could also land on, well, land, as well as water. And they continued tinkering with it over the years. And while its role as a flying yacht was never really realized to any significant extent, 2 groups were remarkably interested in flying boats. The US Navy, and actually, more intrinsically, the US Coast Guard. Both services would order a handful of the Dolphins to serve as transports as well as search and rescue craft. In fact, the US Army Air Corps also ordered a handful under the designations C-21, C-26, and C-29. A handful of rich people did own one as a luxury yacht, including William Boeing, the founder of, well, Boeing, and one was even procured by the Navy specifically to be a transport for the president, FDR, though he would never actually use it. But she does still retain the distinction of the first aircraft procured to provide transportation for the President of the United States, so that's something. They were pretty good as rescue craft. The Coast Guard quite liked them, as since they were developed as, well, luxury yachts, they were remarkably stable. They were very easy to fly. Not exactly something you'd want in combat necessarily, but definitely acceptable for search and rescue and transport roles, and they still had them in service during World War II, even though their design would have been quite old by that point. And I quite like the Dolphins. They're very interesting designs. Or maybe I'm just saying that because it reminds me of the plane from Tailspin. But either way, they did serve. They did save some lives during their time, so that's worthy of praise. There's a single surviving example, and she's located in the United States at the National Museum of Naval Aviation in Pensacola, Florida. The Kawasaki Key 61. Man, the unanimous answer to my question as to whether or not it's Kai or Key sufficiently disappointed me, but I kind of saw it coming. In my heart, I knew it was Key. I just didn't want to admit it. Though I did get one comment pointing out that technically, we shouldn't be pronouncing those designations as words at all. It should be KI 61. But, let's be fair, nobody, no one, not a soul, says those designations by letter if it can be pronounced as an actual word, so I'm going with Key 61. Or alternatively, I could keep saying Kai, and then I'd get a whole bunch of comments correcting me, and that would drive up the algorithm. Decisions, no, it's Key 61. The Hien, or Flying Swallow, was a Japanese World War II fighter aircraft, and the Allied reporting name of this plane was Tony. And I put it on the list, not because it wasn't utilized very much, because it was. They made over 3,000 of them. No, I consider them overlooked because, frankly, you just don't see the Tonys brought up very much. Generally, when Japan is discussed, and their fighters are discussed, you hear the Zero. Which makes sense, the Zeros were extremely prevalent, but the Hiens, or Tonys, however you want to refer to them as, deserve some attention as well, as they were extremely capable fighters. They actually first saw action during the Doolittle raid, which I have a whole video about, and that attack caught Japan so off guard that the initial prototypes for the Hien, which weren't actually meant to enter combat at that point, were sent up to try to deal with the raiders. The design was also very unique by mass-produced Japanese fighter standards. They were the only ones to use a liquid-cooled inverted V engine, and that was a positive and a negative. Their engines were technically quite powerful, making them very capable planes, but they were not perfect. During testing, they were found to be excellent, but the two factors that held them back during the war was the fact that the engine was, frankly, unreliable, and it was hard to maintain because it was so distinctive from everything else. That, and they didn't have much armor. But to be fair, I find that happening a lot when it comes to Japanese planes in particular during World War II. What, you guys want armor? Have you considered fighting better? For the Emperor? It's just that Imperial Japan attitude, you know? The 61s were also held back that they were kind of rushed into service, and a lot of their issues weren't really worked out until the tail end of the conflict. They also matched most Allied aircraft of their time, at least in terms of speed, so they could put up a decent fight, all things considered. And one benefit, despite their lack of armor, they did give themselves sealing fuel tanks, which a lot of Japanese aircraft didn't have. Late in the war, they were also utilized by the Special Attack Unit. And by special attack, I mean they used them to ram American B-29s in an effort to stop the bombing raids on Japan. It was a desperate maneuver, but it kind of worked to a degree. Some pilots even survived the ramming process, but they were expected to do it again and again until they could do it no more. Basically until they died. Imperial Japan, everybody, what are you gonna do? And there's at least 4 that are still in preservation, so while they're somewhat overlooked, they aren't completely forgotten. The Supermarine Walrus. A plane that does its absolute best at looking completely ridiculous, but don't judge a book by its cover. The Mighty Walrus, which was not its original name, it was actually first designated the Seagull 5. It's a bit more complimentary, but no, Walrus. First flew in 1933, so this is another fairly early float plane design. But it did wind up seeing service during World War II, and 740 of these were made. They were used for anti-submarine warfare, but more intrinsically, they were adopted by the RAF Search and Rescue Force, and were used to save the lives of many personnel that were stranded at sea. And in fact, the Walrus is credited with over 1,000 aircrew being rescued during operations with them, which is a very impressive display. And don't let the odd appearance fool you. They were rather stable planes, and you've probably noticed utilized a pusher configuration, which was pretty unusual by World War II. But this had the advantage of keeping the engine and propeller even further out of the way of sea spray when they operated on the water, as well as reducing the noise level inside the aircraft. And they were capable of being launched from ships as well, which was, again, very beneficial. They were great planes, just often overlooked as sometimes these seaplanes tend to be, unless your name is Catalina. Outside of that case, they sometimes fall by the wayside, which is a real shame because they were critically important to the war effort, and several examples do still survive. 3 in museums and 1 privately owned. And I definitely think the Walrus, no matter how ungainly she may be, deserves a lot more love. The IAR-80. Aha! Okay, I got a real obscure one for you, but believe it or not, 450 of this plane were produced, and you're probably wondering, well, who operated that? Well, this is a homegrown aircraft direct from Romania. They were low-wing monoplanes with an all-metal construction, meant to be a fighter and a ground attack aircraft. And when they first flew in 1939, they were comparable to other competing designs from other nations like the Hawker Hurricane, as well as the Bf-109. Romania did run into production problems and had a lack of available armament, which delayed their entry into service until 1941, but they remained in frontline use until May of 1945. It was an impressive, modern airplane for the day. There was also an attempt to modify it for a dive bombing role, becoming the IAR-81, but pilots hated that. The addition of the bomb cradle made the planes too draggy and hampered performance too much to be worth it. The 81s didn't see as much service as the 80s would. Either way, they were very capable aircraft, and actually had quite a few victories over both Soviet planes and American planes. But as the war dragged on, they became more and more outclassed by newer models of aircraft. And when World War II was over and the Soviet occupation of Romania began, all the remaining IAR-80s were replaced with Soviet designs instead, and every single one of them would be scrapped. No complete original examples are believed to have survived. There are a few static replicas, and as of 2017, there have been a few attempts to reproduce an airworthy accurate replica of the planes, but so far, that has not happened. Based on that, it does seem like a few people, probably in Romania, still remember these great planes, and they probably should be talked about a bit more. The Northrop P-61 Black Widow. Yes! 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 So edgy! This is one of my favorite aircraft ever, I just want to be clear. And yeah, I know it looks weird, but the Black Widow is a twin-engine United States Army Air Force's fighter aircraft that first flew on May 26 in 1942 and was introduced fairly late in the conflict in 1944. The name Black Widow wasn't just for dramatic flair. They were designed from the ground up to be a night fighter. They were all-metal, twin-engine, twin-boom aircraft designed with 4 forward-firing 20mm Hispano M2 autocannons in their lower fuselage and 4 half-inch M2 Browning machine guns in a dorsal gun turret. 706 of these planes were built, and they replaced earlier British-designed night fighter aircraft that had been updated to incorporate radar when it became available. The P-61 was meant to use radar from the get-go, which its odd design does owe something to. They had to fit the radar equipment somewhere. But they were very capable, and lethal, especially at night, since the whole point of them is that they could see you, and you couldn't see them. In that way, you could argue that they were stealth aircraft, but, I mean, if the enemy did have a radar, they could be seen. But the vast majority of their opponents didn't, and they saw use both in the European theater as well as the Pacific theater. Though they had some early teething issues and arrived too late to have a significant impact on the conflict, they still deserve a lot more love for their capabilities, and they actually weren't completely retired from service until 1954. Also, fun fact, technically, the last Allied air victory prior to the Japanese surrender was actually carried out by a Black Widow. It happened on August 14th, 1945, and technically she didn't shoot down the enemy plane. The enemy pilot was just trying to evade her and crashed. So her crew was never actually given credit for the kill, but it still kind of belongs to them. Also, worth mentioning, the name of that particular P-61 was Lady in the Dark. Yes! Absolutely! Maximum edge factor! And yes, of course me, History in the Dark, who goes around calling himself Darkness the Curse, would love the Black Widow. Especially one called Lady in the Dark. I have a problem, I know. In any event, a handful did wind up surviving into preservation, with one even under restoration to flying status at the Mid-Atlantic Air Museum in Reading, Pennsylvania. That aircraft actually crashed on January 10th, 1945 on Mount Cyclops in Indonesia, and it was pulled out of the jungle in 1989 by the museum staff. It's been undergoing a slow restoration process since then, and as of June 2019, both engines have been overhauled and 2 brand new props have been hung. So she's almost done. All the others seem to be only static exhibits, so it'll be really cool when that plane finally takes to the skies again. And with that, a special thank you to all my underwater train finders, SomeDude267, Orange Glass, Benjamin Owens, Panzer Kitsune 131-232, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, Tommy Rossini, Brian, Jack Carson's Royal Videos, Lord444, Mark Holding, Murder Jones Doll, A-Person723, Royal 2860, Isaac 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matt Weaver, Tom Redlion, NS Productions 8104, Hannah Bird, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Wheeljack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds The Baxter, Caleb Crosswhite, Ohio Trucker 1, Andrew Bowen, Josh Johnson, Hayden DeGrow, Caleb Rainwaters, Prez Drenton, Master of None, Arizona Hot Rail, Liam Wright, Mr. Sleepy, Travis Stalinsky, Jared Brussel, and Dr. Racer78. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.